Hi, I want to talk about a particular site affected by rising sea levels and coastal archaeology, and how we use that project based on this site to research both the archaeology of the Northern Isles and to engage in outreach and education about how these sites are affected by coastal erosion and rising sea levels. This is what the site looked like before we started excavation. This is the Knowe of Swandro, or the half of it that is being eroded by the sea. The site was known about because part of it is on land and is scheduled. But what we didn't realize was that the greater part of the site was actually under this boulder beach. As you can see, most of that site is actually at this point at high tide under the water. The site of Swandro, which is here, is on the coast of a small island called Rousay, which is one of the Orkney Islands, and it just faces across to mainland Orkney. It's a small island. There's only now about 230 people living on it, but it has a lot of archaeology. And in fact, there's a whole series of sites along this eroding coastline, including two which are in guardianship, the Midhow Broch and the Midhow Neolithic cairn, which are both along this beach. So this is an area where tourists will come and will walk along here to look at the archaeology. Right next to Swandro, there was a late Norse house found, and also an amazing first generation Viking cemetery at Westness, which too is eroding into the sea right now, although it was excavated back in the 1970s. The archaeology of Rousay is one of the sources of income for the island, along with farming and some fishing. And with such a small population, you can imagine that both the added income from tourists coming to something which gives another dimension to the archaeology, plus even the money from the project itself on houses and food and ferries and so on, is actually quite an important part of the income. The site, as I've said, is vanishing into the sea, and from this aerial photograph you can see here both the boulder beach and how the erosion is eating into this coastline. We know from survey that there are no similar sites to this further back. So in other words, these sites are here along this coast for a purpose. And if we allow this site to disappear, there is not a similar site further back inland. This is really a completely vanishing resource. Now, we can either just be upset about that, or we can be upset about that and also use this vanishing resource, realize that it's a reservoir of unique data that we now have a chance to investigate. And that's pretty much the attitude that we've taken to this. The site is actually originally thought just to be a small Iron Age house, and we've now realized that it's much bigger than that from our investigations on the beach. It's not only an Iron Age settlement. You can see here the walls. This is as the tide is coming in, the multiple walls of a very large late Bronze Age, early Iron Age roundhouse that goes on well into the Iron Age period. We've actually got material from the late Iron Age, from the Pictish, from the Viking, and in fact this Norse Hall that was excavated in the 1970s as Westness Hall, we now realize is the latest phase of this same site. We've managed to demonstrate that. So this is a site we wouldn't have understood, we wouldn't have realized the complexity and the importance of it if we hadn't just gone and looked under that boulder beach. The archaeology is truncated by the sea. The deposits slope down under that boulder beach into the sea itself. But nevertheless, it still has a huge amount of value. Every tide takes away some of the silts and the deposits within these intertidal areas. But nevertheless, the stone walls and settings remain, and also in some places there are quite significant patches of midden which give us a huge amount of information. So even in these two slides I show you here, you can see over here, this is the wall of that big Iron Age roundhouse coming around. It's overlain on this top terrace by late Iron Age and Pictish buildings. And then below it, you can see another Iron Age house. And in fact, the deposits down here are probably late Bronze Age, as far as we can tell. This is that Iron Age house on the beach there. You can see the hearth within it, and then the deeper midden layers beneath it. Excavating this site has, in research terms, in academic terms, is incredibly exciting because it's given us something that we wouldn't have had otherwise in terms of understanding of this time period in this area. You can see Historic Environment Scotland let us excavate a little bit into the scheduled area so we could make sense of that big roundhouse. So here is the part that is on the beach and actively being removed. In fact, the coastline comes around here originally like this. And you can see that these massive extra walls have been added to this to form a really impressive entrance and impressive facade to this building to give it a real monumentality. This is not a broch. This is too early to be a broch, and its structure is different. And we have very few of these very early monumental roundhouses. So it's given us a huge amount of information structurally and in date terms about the origin of these buildings. We have both these conventional recordings and as Nicole Burton will be telling you, also a lot of digital data as well, which gives us these lovely 3D representations, because of course this site at some point will disappear completely. And this is all the record we will have, both for archaeology, academia, and for the islanders themselves. As I said, even though that we have this relentless tide upon tide washing away of sediments, the stone settings, the stone walls themselves in parts preserve quite a lot of midden material in fantastic condition. And so obviously, because this is an eroding site, we have a duty to sample and record as much as we can. And the data from a lot of those middens are helping us to understand the prehistoric lifestyle, if you like, the way that people made a living in this quite marginal area in quite a small island. And it's also thrown up some interesting and unexpected results. And I'm just, out of all the environmental evidence, showing you here, this is an articulated skeleton of a small bird of prey, a falcon type bird. And we have a strange range of birds from, these are all from that central roundhouse, including the skull of a white-tailed eagle, which until recently has been extinct in Orkney. And this beak and mandible are from another completely, sadly, extinct species, the great auk, which was also obviously predated in the Iron Age on Rousay. And amongst that, a gathering of data, one of the things we do with the project is we have students and we have volunteers, and we also have professional archaeologists and specialists who work with us so that those students and volunteers get a real experience and understanding of the breadth of archaeology. But of course, the other reason we have those people is that we want the best possible data collection we can have. And here you can see in one of the buildings, which we originally thought was Pictish and we now know is Iron Age proper, appears to be a smithy. And we know this from the evidence that we collected and from the evidence here of Dr. Jerry McDonnell, who is taking readings from the sediments within it. And obviously, as you can see, lots and lots of samples around this little building. It's a really interesting structure. There are steps coming down into it. It's semi-subterranean. It's basically a smith's workshop. And there was both iron smithing and copper alloy casting happening in here, we know from the finds within it. So you would have come down through these, through this doorway, down the steps, close the door. Here's the pivot for the door here. This was a big back stone to keep the draft from the hearth, from the fire, and as you'll see in a minute, we got a real idea of how this space was used. This is a really unusual building to have with this amount of information in it, and it was almost washed away by the sea before we got to it. From that evidence and from the digital recording, you can see that you come down in these steps, close the door behind you, and you're in this room. We know from finds of pieces of tuyere and so on that the bellows and the person working them would have been over on this side of the hearth. And over here are the two anvils where the smith would have knelt, and he even had a little cupboard or aumbrey next to him to keep his tools in. And again, this gives us models and 3D information that we can keep once this building has disappeared. From looking at the again, with permission from HES to survey in the scheduled area, we've managed to get a much better idea from geophysics of what this settlement would have looked like. And it seems that that roundhouse, which is protruding onto the beach around about here, is actually the center, the focus of the settlement, and is actually surrounded by a whole series of other buildings like the one we saw down here on the beach. It's and from these surveys, again, that's how we know there are no further sites beyond it. The Norse longhouse is around about here, and actually under that smithy that I've just shown you, and probably under those longhouses, there appears to be a ditch, a stone-lined ditch, which runs entirely around the settlement. So you can imagine that the original settlement would have been, there would have been at least as much of it out here, which has now disappeared, or mostly disappeared, as the part that we have. But this gives us the context for this building and all these deposits. So we're looking at quite a substantial and long-lived and important settlement. In order to fund what we do on Rousay, and with the encouragement and the massive help of a local tour company owner, Casmanwell, we established an archaeological trust in order to give us a way of raising funds for this work. And the important thing about this trust and about the funds that we have got from it is that some of it is from lots of different little grants that Kaz has put a lot of hard work into, and also from visitors to the site, people from around the world, and from islanders. So it's a really important way both of raising money, but also letting people understand what we're doing and what's happening there. The other important thing in funding terms was 2 grants and support from Historic Environment Scotland, which have really helped us to do this, along with the university, obviously. And the other thing we try to do within as part of the research is that we're part of a research network that runs across the North Atlantic and to other places as well. And that's really important to understand, to exchange information, to understand the best ways of doing things. And the NABO is one of the important organizations in those terms. And just recently, the project became part of Bridges, which is part of a UNESCO Sustainability Science Coalition, which again is going to be a really important outlet for the work that we're doing. I mentioned that we have students on site alongside professional archaeologists and volunteers. And this is really quite important, we feel, because it's important to train the next generation of archaeologists to understand these kind of issues, both the climate change and coastal erosion issues. Some of our students aren't archaeologists, they're actually environmental scientists. To understand all those issues and to be able to be trained to investigate sites is a really important part. And they're not just our students from our university, they're from all parts of the UK and the USA, particularly Hunter College in New York, and from other European universities as well. And it's really important, we feel, that they work alongside professional archaeologists as well as academic tutors so that they get a real training and understanding in modern archaeology. Another part of what we do, obviously, because we're supported by the public and supported by the islanders, it's important that we give that back. And the site, as I said, is on a tourist walk along the coast of the island. So it's really important that those people feel that they can come to site, they'll get a tour, they'll get an explanation of what's happening and all the issues around that. So we're open every day that we're on site. People can come along, but we also have special open days, living history events and so on to generate a little bit more interest, and also crucially to bring in visitors who might not have bothered to come to Rousay otherwise, but because there's an event on, they might feel that they want to. And again, those little bits of income are important for the island, but also it's important for us because it helps us spread the word. We also get small amounts of funding from Orkney Islands Council and from the local Rousay and Wire Trust, and those help us to fund things like those open days and living history events and other community engagement events as well. So in this case, there's one where we had lots of the specialists that were on site explaining the kinds of evidence to islanders and what we were finding out and why. And some of you might recognise Jackie McKinley here, who kindly comes and spends her holidays with us every summer in order to help with doing this kind of thing. So she's explaining human bones to people, and over here is one of our students, research students, Joe, explaining how we use animal bones to gather information from site. And that money's also helped us do things like this. This was a workshop, an illustration workshop for the local island community, led by Alan Braby, who's a professional archaeological illustrator and very well known in Scotland. And this was a very special event, I think, for people, because it gave them a whole day to understand how archaeological illustrations are produced and to try their own hand at doing that as well. So that's us. That's what we do. I think it's important to look at these small unregarded sites and to get what information we can before we disappear. But we're trying to give that added value by training, by outreach, by involving the local community, by enabling them access to their own heritage, and hopefully by leaving behind that evidence when the sites are gone and we're gone too. And that's our team. Thank you very much.